Object-oriented programming, or as known as OOP, is the most important topic in programming in general. Once you hit the intermediate to advanced level, you need to start looking for OOP in everywhere in your code. Probably at the beginning you don't need that for procedure kind of small applications, but when you work in a team, when you work on a real product, you have to know and how to use OOP, or object-oriented programming. From its name, object-oriented programming, we know what is object. Oriented programming, it means that we develop or program everything using object concept. So you already know what is object before, so let's discuss what is OOP. OOP is a paradigm change in how we develop normally software. Normally, previously, we developed software using functional procedure. We put functions all over the place, but while the project grows and grows, it becomes very difficult to maintain these functions and separate them from each other. So that's why we need to consider a better organization, we have to consider a better organization method on how to separate the concern of our classes and objects from each other. So in OOP, we have 4 pillars we have to follow: abstractions, inheritance, polymorphism, and encapsulation. I will explain the first 2, and I will give you a homework to search for the rest, polymorphism and encapsulation, and then let me know in the comments what did you understand from these last two concepts. So let's start with the abstraction. Abstraction means hide the complexity from me. So a good example from your life, you have a printer and you have in a software somewhere where you can print a page, A4 page. Well, from your perspective as a user, you have that button only. You click that button and all the complexity of dealing with the ink, dealing with the printer, dealing with printing the content of the page is hidden from you. All this complexity, you don't need to worry about them. You just need to know how to use this class, this object, which is the printer, and that is how we define abstraction, OOP. So if we go back to code, if we write a class, this class, not all its properties or methods should be publicly available, right? So we publish only the necessary functions. Like for example, in the print function, we might have different functions calling, for example, the hardware, calling the software, calling different pieces of hardware, and until we get out the paper, A4 paper. And all this complexity inside the print action, you don't need to worry about that. You need to worry about the input and output. The input is the print button, and the output is the A4 paper. So that is abstraction. Inheritance, it means that you have an object inherits from something else. Let's take the same example of a printer. Printer, if you have a type of HP or Sony or Toshiba, whatever model or brand you are using, all of them, they inherit to the same parent class, which is printer in general, right? We have a printer class. That printer class has a print method, but each of these printers model or brand has its own implementation of connecting to the hardware, receiving the order from the computer, printing that to the paper, all that stuff. So each brand will be different from other. That's why we inherit from the parent, which is the parent, the printer, and then each one will do its own. We'll explain that in an example. Let's start with a simple example of defining a class called printer. So again, a class is basically a blueprint for your objects to inherit from or to instantiate from. So class printer, this is the general class, and then we have a function inside that called print. This print doesn't have anything, right? But we have different models, let's say class HP extends printer, which means the HP is inherits its details from the parent, the printer, and it has its own print function. So if you do like this, let's say console.log print from HP printer. Okay, well, obviously we don't want to use the abstract class, so that's why we can use abstract keyword to prevent using this class as its own. However, in pure JavaScript, we don't have that. We have it in other languages such as Java or C or even PHP. We have it as well. But here we cannot make that abstract. But remember, we can add the abstract in other languages. Abstract means that we cannot use this class directly. We have to inherit that and use it from the children. So HP in this case is kind of a children to the printer. Okay, printer concept. Probably we have another one called, let's say we have Sony, for example, that also extends printer, and it has its own print statement or print functionality. So in this case, print from Sony printer. And now to create the object, right? To create the object, we use this keyword. We say const, let's define const, HP equal to new HP, right? And this is the syntax. Const, or we can use var or let, but normally once we define an object, we store it in a const. So const HP, the name of the printer, that's the object that we instantiate from the parent class, which is HP. And remember also HP inherits from the parent. Now if we call the print function on the HP, this should give us this statement, print from HP printer, right? So let's try that. We say hp.print, and we should see in the console print from HP printer. But let's before we run the console, let's do the same thing for the Sony. So here I'm going to define Sony, and then here Sony, the class Sony, we instantiate that, and then here I'm going to call Sony.print. Okay, let's do that in 2 lines here. So here we go. We instantiated an HP object that is coming from this class HP, and Sony object from the Sony class. And then if we run the console now, we should see print from HP printer, print from Sony printer. So this defines that this class, the HP, we can call the print function without knowing its details. Probably here in this line, we are just printing to the console, but of course we need to connect to the hardware. The hardware can do its magic to print the paper. Probably we're doing something in the UI, all that stuff. We don't need to worry about that, and that is abstraction, right? The inheritance is where we can inherit these objects from each other. The HP inherits the functionality of a printer. The Sony inherits the functionality of the printer. Probably you can inherit more than once. Let's say in HP, we have different models, probably HP model 1 or probably model S, whatever it is. I don't know exactly what models they have, or probably they define it with a number. Then in that case, we can define a class, let's call it HP model S, that extends, now look at this, it should extends the HP class, HB. Right? And here we can override the print statement that is available on its parent, which is the HP class. So here we can say print from HP model S printer, right? And then here we can test that const HP model S equal new HP model S, and that we can call it here HP model S dot print, and then this should give us a different value from its parent, which is the HP. So here we have HP models. HP is not defined. I think we made some mistake here. HP, not B. Okay, now if we run this again, we have print from HP printer from Sony and HP model S. Okay, I advise you to look for the next 2 topics, the polymorphism and encapsulation. They are pretty easy, just you need to do some research and understand them and comment that in the comments what did you understand from them based on this example of the printer, how you can apply this polymorphism and encapsulation on the printer example.